Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage.
Hey folks, I'm back again. Memorial Day weekend, which may not mean anything to you if you don't live in the U.S. or if you're watching this video at some time in the future, which probably most people will be. This is one of the stranger reasons for me doing a video, and it's simply because I like to do videos around what is, for a lot of people, a holiday weekend. I mean, for a lot of people, they've got a 3-day work week, but a 3-day weekend, which we're in now. But actually, that's probably not the case for most of my core audience because they don't work traditional jobs. So probably my core audience is probably more than likely actually working this weekend. So I decided to do a video anyway, simply because I had stumbled across an old Amazon review that I wrote. It's funny, I started reading it before I looked at who posted it, and then I realized, oh, this is me who wrote this. So it was 8 or 9 years ago, on Memorial Day weekend, this very weekend, which was long before I was even watching YouTube, forget about recording videos. I used to write a lot more previous to being on YouTube. I used to write a lot more album reviews than I do now. And one Memorial Day weekend, and as soon as I read this, it jogged my memory. So it's a funny thing what can jog your memory. So it was 8 or 9 years ago on a Memorial Day weekend. Now my traditional summer 3-day weekends, I'm a loser, so I don't go out to barbecues and cookouts, regardless of whether I have a job or not. I pretty much am a stay-at-home kind of guy. To me, that's what I like to do in my free time, and regardless if I have money to go out or not. And so about 8 or 9 years ago, when the Memorial Day weekend, I was working my normal office job. I had a 3-day weekend. I apparently hadn't listened all that much during the course of the year to the great guitarist John Abercrombie, and I started pulling out my favorite albums by him, which are pretty much stuff done in the 70s, a little bit of the early 80s, and specifically his first great quartet with the pianist Richie Bayrock. And I really started listening to all of those, like pretty exclusively John Abercrombie music, on that Memorial Day weekend. I said it was 8 or 9 years ago, which prompted me to write a review on Amazon. And in the review, I mentioned the fact that I was spending the Memorial Day weekend listening to my favorite era of John Abercrombie and really appreciating how great that music was. And kind of forgot about the review, and now just for the hell of it, I'll go to Amazon to read reviews of albums I already have. Amazon reviews are great if you're thinking of buying an album and you want to see what people say about it, to see if maybe it's something that you may or may not like if you're kind of on the fence about buying it. So it's good for that. But actually, I read more reviews of albums written by people that I actually already have in my collection because I like to see what other people think of them, especially my favorites, or ones in an artist's catalog that I think are particularly awful. I want to see if anybody else feels the same as I do. So I went to, I'm reading this Amazon review, and I'm halfway through it before I looked at the name of the reviewer, and I realized it was me. But it's kind of funny the things that, and it brought me right back. When I saw that review that I had written on Amazon, it brought me right back. I could picture myself in my room writing that review that very weekend, sitting at the computer the way I had it set up, And it was weird. I just had the whole visual image and everything like I had done it yesterday. So it kind of, in a way, prompted me to want to do the modern version of that, I guess you could say, and that is come out here and do a Tales from the Garage. And I don't know, they're hard for me to do these during the daytime too. I wouldn't say I'm distracted. I mean, I could hear noise outside beyond the garage door, but not very much during the day. And there's no windows in here, so it's very much a man cave. And yet, I don't know. I want to do these at night. To me, the music that I'm speaking about, and the music that I'm playing in the background, which you probably can't hear, is, I don't know, it's just more conducive to nighttime, and I can focus better to the extent that I can focus at all. And I had started a little thread about talking on my last video about how these cyclical things happen with the seasons, where all of a sudden the weather gets warmer and all of a sudden I start getting desires to hear more acoustic-based music. And I showed a bunch of things, especially classical. It seems like the springtime, late springtime, early, and certainly all of the summertime, all of the warm weather months here. I really get this vibe to hear acoustic music and a lot of classical music. I wanted to piggyback on that because there's one CD that I really love that I forgot to mention, and I'm not sure if I showed. I don't know, it's Ginastera or Ginestra, how you pronounce it. Now, in the classical world, he's a very well-known composer, but honest to God, I had never heard of this guy. And until I accidentally stumbled across this particular album, and this is just a couple years ago. And I heard the piece on YouTube. He's got a lot of pieces on YouTube. And if you love traditional classical orchestral music, but you also like it a bit on the slower side in terms of, it's not crazy, it's not wild. There's, the thing with a lot of classical music, the traditional stuff, is it doesn't sit in one place very long. There's no steady rhythm. There's constant changes all over the place. And I wouldn't say it's hard to follow, but you have to pay attention. Sometimes you want things that are a bit more kind of ambient in nature. I wouldn't say this is exactly ambient classical music. But he seems to be a composer that who passed away in 1983, by the way. Would be considered a modern composer. But his stuff is really a bit more of a slower journey than a lot of the traditional classical orchestral non-avant-garde type of composers are. And it was weird because it's weird that I never heard of him, because apparently, I think I'm right in this, Emerson, Lake and Palmer took one of his tracks and turned it into one of theirs kind of thing, but I think he got credit. I'm not a big ELP fan, so but I'm surprised that I hadn't heard of him through that connection, in the 70s, when ELP was getting a lot of attention for every album that they came out with, because they were quite big at the time. So surprised I hadn't heard of him, like Aaron Copland, through the ELP kind of connection. There's a ton. I created a folder somewhere. I don't even know if I can find it. I've created so many folders on my YouTube page, but I did create a folder with a bunch of his works on it in YouTube. But I gotta say, they're easy to find. And if you think you like any kind of traditional classical music and orchestral stuff, but maybe stuff that taken at a slightly less rapid of a change. I don't know how to describe it. Because you could go on YouTube and just find full pieces, the 14, 15, 20-minute pieces that he's done, and listen to them. And there's just every one I heard, I don't think there's one I didn't like. I ended up putting in my wish list. So I just wanted to put this out there for any folks that who are like me, who may want to listen to some classical orchestral music but don't really know much about it. Apart from the classical music and the acoustic stuff, I'm not exactly 100% sure why I'm in the mood for this at this time, but a number of months ago, probably over a year ago, I posted this album up because it never came out on CD, long out of print. Dave Holland, Derek Bailey, Improvisations for Cello and Guitar. Now, I had it in my computer for a long time, but I didn't really listen to it that frequently, like maybe once a year, until I put it up on my YouTube channel. And it's, you know, for the type of music this is very avant-garde. I don't know if you want to call it noise music, but essentially it's improvised sound more than it's music. Once I put this up, I got a lot of views on it for the kind of non-commercial music it is. Interestingly, you know, even though Dave Holland and Derek Bailey are very well known, I could probably put up a Dave Holland album that's more mainstream, you know, more traditional jazz that would get less plays. So it's interesting how people kind of are drawn to this. And posting it up and seeing all these people that went to view it made me get into listening to it again. And from there, I started listening recently again to free jazz. And this type of free jazz, you know, this kind of avant-garde music in general. And, you know, it's that anybody that's into free jazz probably goes through periods where they don't listen to it for long periods of time. The one thing about it, it's never music that you put on when you're not sure what you're in the mood to hear. It's only something you put on when you want to specifically hear free jazz. It's never something that you put in the mix with, you know, well, I'll put a Derek Bailey tune in there and a Yellow Jackets tune and a smooth jazz tune and a, you know, mainstream bebop tune and a new age electronic tune. You wouldn't ever put it in a mix. And this is, you know, and like most people, you know, who had discovered free jazz in the, I guess, you know, 1978, 1979, I did have an intense period where I listened to it a lot, like every day. I wouldn't say it was the only music I listened to, but there was a point in the, you know, 79, 80, 81 where that was almost all I did listen to for a while. And then, of course, you know, more conventional types of forms of music began to sneak in there. And, you know, eventually, you know, I went in cycles and didn't play as much free jazz. And then there were periods where I didn't listen to it at all. And oddly enough, now, this last period, this last number of years, I've hardly listened to it at all. And I wouldn't say, unlike like rock music, I wouldn't say it's something I outgrew, because I always knew I would get back to it. But I just wasn't getting the desire to hear it. And then, you know, I put up this album mainly, you know, on the YouTube channel, mainly for people to hear, because it's been out of print for so long. And I started listening to it again. And then I started listening to Derek Bailey. There's a, you know, a whole bunch of things all over on YouTube of Derek Bailey solo performances, etc., etc., and his collaborators. And from there, started listening to free jazz again for the first time in years. And about the only stuff I intentionally avoided is the real heavy saxophone-led free jazz. To me, I wouldn't say it's a different category of free jazz, but it's the noisiest. So if you have, like, you know, a band that's got 2 or 3 saxophones in it, and they're playing the kind of wild free jazz, you know, where they're doing a lot of screeching and all that, that's kind of like the heavy metal version of free jazz. That's the harder to get into stuff, but it's the noisy, intense stuff. Now that I really haven't been into. I haven't been listening to this go around. I've been kind of avoiding the squealing, squawking, honking saxophones, and opting for the quieter things, which is why I like, say, Derek Bailey solo, because he'll make a sound and then leave several seconds of silence. And it's interesting. And some of the stuff, you actually listen to it at normal levels, and then other things I'll tend to put on a lower volume level, and it has a different effect at a lower volume level. Very interesting. Kind of like the way ambient music was originally constructed to be mixed in with the background. So I've gotten into this thing lately, thanks to this album, of getting back to free jazz. avoiding certain types of it. Which led me to the other day, this is basically what I've been listening to lately video, I guess, which led me to listen to a few albums that I hadn't listened to in a while, in a few years. This kind of, even though it's not free jazz, and I'm into electronic music, and not just the kind of new age electronic music or the Klaus Schulze Tangerine Dream electronic music, but the real avant-garde, free kind of, like it's almost like a free jazz version of electronic music, which is really the stuff that never sells enough albums to make the composer able to earn a living. And literally all these guys that are serious about this, that do this their whole lives, end up having to be teachers just to make a living. And this guy is no exception, but he's one of those that have been doing it for a very long time. Born in 1939, still out there doing it. Last I knew, he was teaching in upstate New York, not that far from where, I'm kind of on the border of New York State, but I'm not sure exactly what college he teaches at, the electronic school of music in this college. But it's this guy, Richard Teitelbaum. I only have a few things by him, and I don't know how much stuff is on YouTube. I looked the other day, and I'm drawing a blank as to how much I found. But it's interesting that I think all the 3 albums I have by him that I'm showing here, all appear to have been recorded live. Most of them studio recordings, but live in the studio. And what Richard Teitelbaum is he's basically a composer, and he goes way back to the late 60s as far as using electronic equipment. But his music is very avant-garde, very sound-based. You can actually listen to like a Derek Bailey album and then put on like some Richard Teitelbaum music, and they're not that far apart. So here's a collaborative album that came out in the, I want to say the 90s. I looked, but I don't remember. I looked for dates, and now I can't even get the CD case open. Yeah, I'm not seeing date. The date was mentioned somewhere in the liner notes, and now I have to read all the liner notes to find the date. I want to say the 90s. I think this is from the mid to late 90s. Damn, I knew it was in here, too. I don't know why they just don't put fucking recording date on here, And you have to read all the liner notes to find out where it is. But it's a collaborative album, and a lot of people that, if you're into this kind of music, you may have heard of, others that I haven't. There's a guy, Tom Cora, that I haven't heard of, Michael Vastis, Carlos Zingaro, who I think I've heard of, but I'm not sure. But there's a couple of other people that collaborate on here that if you're familiar with this kind of music, you would definitely know. George Lewis, trombone player, but also electronics, and Fred Frith, the guitarist, which I was surprised to see. I had totally forgotten that Fred Frith plays on this album. I kind of associate Fred Frith with coming out of the rock thing into an avant-garde rock thing, but never actually rubbing elbows with the guys that are into the serious, university type of electronic music that that came out of these guys that studied a great deal of music theory, etc., like Teitelbaum. But this is one that I listened to. It's weird that I got in the mood to hear Teitelbaum just because I happened to. I was listening to some like Derek Bailey stuff, and I looked up on my stack of CD shelves and I saw Teitelbaum's name, and I'm like, yeah, I haven't listened to him for a while. And so I pulled out the 3 CDs that I have by him, different permeations. Here's one that was initially recorded in 1981, but it didn't come out at the time. It didn't come out till many years later. And it's a duet live album, apparently, I think all from a single day. February 14th, 1981, with Andrew Cyrille who, if you're heavily into jazz and the free jazz world, maybe this is the connection to the free jazz world, you would know Andrew Cyrille, the drummer percussionist. It's probably, I'm betting, I don't know where these guys met, but I'm betting that they may have taught together somewhere. Interesting combination. Andrew Cyrille, very much a free drummer, from the jazz world, along with Teitelbaum's modular synthesizers. This one I bought. I saved the. This is one that I have this habit I've talked about before. I bought this at Tower Records, and I saved the receipt so that I could always have a reference to when I bought it, in terms of the date. And I stuck the receipt inside, which I love when I do that, and I always try to do that, but it's gotten so faded. Actually, the print looks darker on the camera here, actually, than I can't even read it. So I can't be 100% sure of the actual date that I bought it a number of years ago. The part of the receipt that I can read, though, I can read one of the other. I bought like 4 CDs. And, this one, and one of the others I bought that I could read, because for some reason that part of the ink stayed darker, is Mike Richmond, the bass player. One of his CDs he did as a leader. I'll show one of these days. I only have a couple of them. And this is interesting. You have to be into avant-garde electronics and free music, and you'll never hear a melody or something you can hum, that's for sure. But I was really digging this, and I was like, wow, I guess I've been away from this stuff for a little while. And I wouldn't say possibly the best out of the 3, but I really enjoyed this one. And that the Andrew Cyrille one was from '81. Here's a live, I believe this was live also in his studio, duet with Anthony Braxton and Richard Teitelbaum. Though, in this case, oddly enough, all of the credit in terms of composition is given to Anthony Braxton on saxophones, but it's obvious that this is improvised, and I'm not 100% sure why Teitelbaum isn't really given co-credit, because he's, again, there's a lot of sounds going on that you couldn't notate it if you tried, so obviously Teitelbaum is coming up with these, probably based on maybe a series of directions that Braxton gave him, but not necessarily in terms of harmonic or chord progressions or anything. And, because Braxton is, and by the way, this is playing now in the background, because Braxton's playing pretty free too. I'd be surprised if he notated any of the stuff that he's playing on this. But this was from March 18, 1982. Interesting that so many of these albums were done in a day. The first one that I showed, the collaboration with George Lewis and Fred Frith, I think that was done over the period of 3 days. The Andrew Cyrille one and this one were both done in one day. It's maybe my favorite of the 3. Again, you can't predict anything, and it's one of those albums where, how do you describe it? You can listen to the whole thing through once and play it through again and not really recognize anything. It's very, which I like. It's abstract. The one thing to me, it's nearly impossible to do with these albums, this music, and specifically this particular album. It's almost impossible to listen to it when there's daylight outside. I don't know why. It's just one of those things. This is an album to listen to in the still of the night. It's quiet, you're home, you're awake, it's 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning or something. It begs to be listened to at that time. And it seems like you get more out of it when you listen to it at that time. Don't know why. I definitely want to pick up more Teitelbaum, and I really want to get more solo stuff by him, where it's just him, because of the 3 albums and this one additional piece that I have by him, this is my favorite. This is part of the Centaur Records. I love this label and I love this series. The CDCM Computer Music Series that's been going on for ages now. This is volume 2. Last I checked, they were up to volume like 49, or they're in the 50s already. I'd love to get them all. Some of them I think have gone out of print. You can imagine they don't sell a whole lot of copies. And just about every one of them features multiple performers. There's a couple in the series that focus on only one performer. I can only think of 2 of them, though there may be more. For the most part, and sometimes you do see a few names repeated, that come up more than once. I have one that's got a Pauline Oliveros piece on it. Neil B. Rolnick, who's on this one, I recall him popping up on several that I have. So there's a few people that show up more than once. I thought Teitelbaum was one of those, but at least this is the only one that I have that's got a piece of his. He does a piece on here called Golem 1, named after that fictitious creature that was made out of mud, and, back in, it's one of those folk stories from like early Jewish religion, it goes back hundreds of years. And he does this piece just for electronics. There's no other performers on it. It's 19 minutes, so it's kind of the highlight of the album. And I really love it. It's actually my favorite thing that I've heard him do. So I definitely want to get more Teitelbaum music. This was from 1987 that he did this. This Golem 1 piece. I love this. The Centaur Records, the whole CDCM computer music series. I can't get enough of it. I want to eventually get the whole their whole catalog of stuff. And there's a which listening to that stuff got me into more of the computer music series stuff. There's another label which probably jazz fans would be familiar with, and electronic and avant-garde music fans. The Wergo, W-E-R-G-O label out of Germany, and they did their own kind of version of the Centaur Records CDCM computer music series. They did one called just Music with Computers. The Computer Music Currents. This is number 12. They've got a whole bunch of these as well. I'm not sure of how many they've done. These Wergo used to be easier to get than they have been recently, because it's even their more mainstream stuff is pretty avant-garde. So there's not a whole lot of commercial potential, which I think is hurting the distribution that they get here in the States. But this is another series, this Computer Music Currents series on Wergo that I would love to have all of. And it got me into listening to this stuff. And again, this is mostly avant-garde electronics, not exclusively electronics. A lot of the electronic pieces are mixed in with acoustic performers. Sometimes it's strictly acoustic performers, and there is some treatments applied to the acoustic instruments, which is the only electronic aspect of the whole composition. And it's not always extremely, well, it's always pretty avant-garde, but it's not always extremely abstract. A lot of those, actually most of the performances that use other musicians use like classical musicians, and they're reading parts, and they're playing parts on violins or cellos or whatever. And there's an electronic aspect applied after the fact, which is where the electronic part of it comes from. And again, but this is night music. I love Wergo. I love Wergo records just in general. I get excited every time I see something. I've got one also. I bought this at Tower Records. I remember. This is how crazy expensive some of these things were to get. Now I bought this, I want to say probably in the mid 90s, early 90s. This was $19.99 at Tower Records, and I picked it up without blinking. It wasn't even on sale because I got the sticker on here still. And it's only about 40 minutes worth of music. Again, it's music with computers. For some reason, they didn't put the title Computer Music Currents on here, or number it that it's part of one of those series. And it's 3 different composers, so it's much like the others, which are essentially all different artists doing different pieces. But in the same mode, acoustic instruments mixed with electronics, very unpredictable, very avant-garde, very non-commercial. But it's weird how one thing jumped into my... I'm listening to pulling out all my kind of avant-garde electronic things now. That came from that, listening to the Derek Bailey, Dave Holland free jazz thing, and then I wanted to hear free other music that wasn't jazz, maybe. So it's weird how we get into these cycles. This time, the cycle doesn't have anything to do with the seasons. This isn't music I necessarily associate with any particular time of year, summer, winter, whatever. It's just one of those things that sometimes I don't listen to for, in the case of free jazz, for years. Most of the avant-garde electronics, I'll get to an album here and there on a regular basis, but I'm in that mode mixed in with my classical acoustic stuff, which is the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where everything is written out, for the performers to play, and there's very noticeable chord changes and parts and melodies and harmonies and stuff like that. So this is what I'm doing. I'm not leaving the house this holiday weekend, and the roads are crazy anyway. It seems like if the people didn't head out to go away for the weekend, they're out shopping. It's like nobody seems to stay put. So for anybody who may be like me, I don't know how many of those there are, that may have a little bit of extra time this weekend, I decided to put this video up, and just because I kind of wanted to do something on the semi-holiday weekend, only because of that whole thing of finding that old review that I wrote on Amazon that pinpointed exactly that one weekend what I was doing 8 years ago on that Memorial Day weekend when I was pulling out listening to my John Abercrombie albums. So this was really an update, which I don't do a lot of what I've been listening to lately and what I'm currently into. I haven't done part 4 of Terry Riley yet. The first 3 parts I actually recorded fairly close together and then posted up at various points. I haven't done the 4th part, and I really got to get to it because I spent weeks listening to that music, and it's starting to fade from memory now, so I got to get that done at some point. And apart from that, beware of the Windows 10 update. This is an old computer that I have here in the garage, and this is Windows 7, and it had a massive Windows 10 update this past week, and my webcam no longer works in my bedroom, which means I can't film any more videos in that room. So it's not a problem that I have to deal with until the weather gets too cold out here. So I have a good 6 months that I can hope that something happens. I don't know, like another Windows 10 update is going to fix that webcam problem. I don't think so. The only chance I have is the webcam manufacturer may get enough complaints or notices that their old webcams don't work with Windows 10. Will they do anything? Who knows? They could sell new cameras now. So I don't know if that's going to be fixed. If not, I can't do videos there anymore on that computer. And the only thing I could do, I don't know where I would set it up, is when the weather gets too cold to do them out here, is to physically dismantle this computer, which is a major pain the way it's hooked up here, and everything's in corners and plugged into things, and bring the computer into, I don't have much space in there to set it up even, to set this computer up out in my bedroom. So I don't know what I'm going to do, but I have 6 months to worry about it. So that's what's going on. Hope everybody's doing well, and I will do another update whenever I can. Take care, everybody.
Tune in next time for more
Tales from the Garage.